Glenn, this isn't church. You don't have to sit at the back, so you can be close to the escape routes. Okay, we'll just wait for Mike and Doug to get their sandwiches, and then we'll get underway. All right, sounds good. So, Lindy, I think you can hit record. Perfect. So greetings to our 25 or so people who are online, and greetings to everybody in the audience. My name is Bill Whitelaw. I'm the Managing Director of Strategy and Sustainability at a software and energy intelligence company here in town called Geologic Systems. And that's apropos of nothing. The real identifier is that I'm a huge CRIN advocate and supporter. I was just, Sally and I were conversing back in the days when CRIN was a supercluster application. In another part of my life, I'm involved in the agricultural sector, and I chaired the Smart Agri-Food Innovation Supercluster process. And we had this deal with CRIN where Joy Romero and Ginny Flood were on my board for that application process. And it was kind of cool. And as CRIN was born and funded, I've been a huge advocate. I have the privilege of serving with Nan on the digital technologies theme committee, and I learn a lot through that process. And so that's the shameless promotion for CRIN. It's an incredible network of networks. And if you're not a member, join. It doesn't cost you anything except your commitment to the system and the ecosystem and collaboration and the way things work. And the focus of our conversation today is also a beneficiary of the way CRIN looks at and funds things. And I was saying to Sally, and Glenn knows this, is that, you know, as much as the federal government sometimes takes it on the chin for a perceived lack of support for the energy sector, CRIN is federally funded through the SIF program, the Strategic Innovation Funding Program. And so the feds do good work. They believe in investing in the right things for the right reason at the right times. And Acceleware is a great example of that, and that will become too. So just a couple of other sort of housekeeping. This is intended to be an interactive conversation. I go to too many passive audience things where the audience just sits there. And I know a number of people in the room, and I will be calling you out to share your experiences around the themes that I'll introduce shortly, because it's that collaborative spirit of CRIN, which is really the way problems get solved and things advance forward, right? And we're here for Acceleware. So I've seen Nicole's making eye contact with me. She's going to ask, when you have the Federal Trade Commission service here, that's also a good thing in terms of carrying the work of CRIN to global audiences in terms of it. Now, this is also the moment often in these meetings where you say, and we're pleased to be here on the lands of such and such and such and such. I'm fed up with reconciliation by rote, right? Right up there, we do the land acknowledgement right up there with during the safety moment, and the bathrooms are over there. So what I like to do is pay it forward. The Indigenous community is an incredibly important part of the way the energy system is evolving, the ecosystem. So I would draw your attention to two things that are really important and ask you to pay it forward by talking about them. One is Ochis First Nation is opening up a business office here in downtown Calgary today, right? This is a community up in the Rocky Mountain House area. And when you look at these Indigenous communities, they've got some phenomenal business plans. And they're great partners on many things, notwithstanding the odd headline you get from time to time. The other one I would ask you to reflect on is the East Calgary Carbon Hub proposal from Reconciliation Energy Transition, Inc., Steve Mason's project. They're going to have a significant amount of Indigenous equity in that project, including a very cool sustainable aviation's fuel initiative with the Siksika Nation just to the east of where the Carbon Hub project is. So we can pay it forward by talking about these things more effectively and more frequently than just some banal acknowledgement on the PowerPoint presentation. So I'll just leave you with that. So we've got a great panel today, and we want to do a couple of things. We want to be able to start cracking the code around some of our sector's inconvenient truths. I'm old enough and not worried enough about employment, so I can actually be provocatively productive in terms of calling out some of the way our sector operates that is extremely frustrating in terms of some of the talk and the walk contradictions, right? In terms of the way the C-suite will say things and doesn't actually manifest in the way they do things. And, you know, I'll just put that out there because you all know that inconvenient truth. But today we're going to be focusing on Acceleware and its CTI technology within the context of the innovator's dilemma, is how do we crack the code? And this is going to be very important for me because I sit on the board of a little pipeline integrity company called Total Containment. And we're in the exact same space as Acceleware. We got this phenomenal Polyurea coating we wrap around pipelines and embed sensing technology into it. And do you think we can get anybody to pay attention to it? It could revolutionize crossings in the way the industry looks at pipelines. And yet, it all falls on deaf ear. So today we're going to hear what's going to happen is our three panelists are going to give 6 to 7 minutes of introductory context setting. So Geoff will tell the Acceleware story. Jane Cavanagh from Scovan will tell the Scovan story via the partnership that they have with Acceleware, including their exciting pilot project at Marwayne. And then, of course, he needs no introduction. I remember, Ian doesn't remember this as well as I do, but before Northwest was built, we stood on the bare land up in Sturgeon County and with Doug Birch and Rob Pierce and a bunch of the other Northwest executives at the time. And Ian said, we're locating here because Agrium is over there. I remember that very clearly. And this was at the time when, I was publishing Oil Week magazine at the time. And we would put all these maps out and it said, look at all these 15 upgrader projects that are, the industry's proposing and that sort of thing. One came to pass, and that guy's responsible for it. But he's the entrepreneur's entrepreneur. He runs Northwest Capital. He's going to talk about his experience and also his new cool company, Hydrogen Naturally, which ties into the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line and Handset, all the stuff that's going on in the ecosystem. As we go through their presentations, I've got a bunch of questions, but I want the questions to come from you and online. And the rules of engagement with the online people is Lindy will send the questions to me, I'll repeat them, and then we'll answer them. But forewarned, if I see you making eye contact with me, I'm going to get you answer a question to share it. So we have a bunch of stuff where we can do our posts afterwards. It says, this was truly an audience panel integrated experience, okay? So with me quit rambling on, Geoff, over to you.
All right, thanks, Bill. Yeah, so 7 minutes to tell the Acceleware story, so I'm gonna have to get to it. Great idea about the Indigenous Pay It Forward bill. Recently, Acceleware has a board member, Jim Boucher, former chief of Fort Mackay First Nation, and he was recently appointed to Alberta Energy's Committee on Tailings Ponds, and pretty soon they're going to be sending out some requests for information and proposals for technology and other ways to deal with tailings ponds going forward. So another way that Indigenous people are getting involved in things that are clearly impact them. And yeah, congratulations to Jim. So the Acceleware story, I'll probably focus on Acceleware 3.0, as I call it. Acceleware previously had 2 other versions of itself, which were all fairly successful and kind of grew into Acceleware 3.0, which I'll call the industrial heating, electromagnetic industrial heating technology. Basically, what happened was, and I'm going to try to figure out what I'd like the audience to try to get to is how do you make serendipity work? Because if I tell this story right, you'll wonder, like, how did that all happen? So, so when we were back in 2010, independently, Chevron and Exxon came to us and said, what do you think of the idea of using radio frequency energy to heat oil sands and heavy oil in situ? And it was interesting because we said to Chevron, well, how did you hear about us? And Chevron said, well, we were talking to this guy who is developing radio frequency generators in Nova Scotia. And they were saying, well, who would have the best electromagnetic simulation software? And they said, well, we don't know, but there's this guy at Dalhousie University and he might know. Turns out the guy at Dalhousie University is one of the founders of Acceleware. And he said, well, you should talk to Acceleware. And so we got involved with Chevron. We got involved for predominantly the same reason with Nexen. And Nexen at the time was looking at using radio frequency heating in conjunction with solvent in a consortium that involved Suncor and Laricina. So we also got introduced to Suncor and Laricina, and we started thinking about how to do radio frequency heating in situ and try to avoid some of the pitfalls that had plagued the technology in the past. And as we were working with Suncor, we decided that one of the problems with the existing technology was that the equipment, the radio frequency generation equipment, was way too expensive and not nearly as efficient as it needed to be. And one of the things that we needed to do was make the electronics solid state. So I was talking at a conference to a guy that I used to work with who was then working at GE. And he said, well, you know what, we're developing a new technology called silicon carbide transistors, which are high frequency, solid state electronics, low cost, super efficient. And I said, well, that's exactly what we need. So I asked Michael, our chief scientist, is that something that we could use? And he said, yeah, I think it is. And so then we got into a partnership with GE to develop the electronics and applied for funding through Alberta, Emissions Reduction Alberta and SDTC. So feds and the province went together on a funding call. We were able to get $10 million of funding through SDTC and ERA, and we got Suncor and GE to help us with the technology development. Since then, we've been able to get Alberta Innovates to join the funding, as well as most recently CRIN. On the industry partnership side, we were able to parlay the partnership of Suncor into getting Cenovus involved and a third oil sands producer as well. So it was just a bunch of collisions getting together and getting the technology off the ground and into the ground at Marwayne. So we ended up doing a commercial scale pilot of RFXL technology, which is radio frequency heating applied to in situ reservoirs. We did a full scale pilot at Marwayne, $30 million pilot, about $19 million of government funding, about $6 million of industry funding, and the balance was Acceleware's own capital. Along the way, one of my advisory board members, Jeff Reading, who's here today, he said, you guys should really talk to Scovan about doing some of your surface engineering, some of your engineering work. So that's how we got involved with Scovan. Scovan did all of our surface facility engineering. Scovan is an investor in Acceleware, and we have an ongoing partnership. So it was just a matter of people getting together, networking, and to get this thing off the ground. So I'm trying to figure out, like, how do you actually figure out how to make those serendipitous collisions work, like when you really need them to? Because now we're sitting in a place where we've done 6 months of heating at Marwayne. It was very successful. We'd like to upgrade some of our downhole componentry. The CTI, the electronics, we call the clean tech inverter, worked pretty flawlessly, backed by the electrical installation that Scovan helped us with. But really, we want to take some lessons learned from the initial phase of heating, upgrade our downhole componentry, and do a second phase of heating. But we need another $5 million of funding approximately to pull that off. So that's kind of where we stand right now, is looking for funding. We know the design we want to put in the ground, and we're pretty excited about that right now.
So that's a wonderful overview. But as we pass it over to Jane for the Scovan dimensions of that and the important partnership considerations, just to put in the back of your head, a question I'll ask you to kick off is, when you were first having these conversations with the Chevrons and the Nexans back in the day, you could probably go for 6 months in this industry without hearing the word decarbonization. And so I'm going to get you to reflect on what were the early motivators for an investment and a relationship with Acceleware in terms of what levers we might pull today that might get us to that $5 million threshold. So
Right. And it's still true today that a new technology that is decarbonizing can't really add to the cost base. And so really our pitch then and our pitch now is, well, we can actually, in fact, be low cost in terms of capital cost, lower cost in terms of operating expense. And therefore, this is a win-win because we can also be decarbonizing at the same time.
So in a way that I sat through a presentation yesterday from the folks from the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board on the 2 standards they've got out for public consultation right now, and lots of discussion around how technology might show up in somebody's ESG report from a measurable data point of view, and we'll come back to that. So we'll turn to Jane now and to sort of carry on the theme of the partnership and all the great work that went on our way, but Scovan's interesting business model too.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, guys. So yeah, my name's Jane Cavanagh. I'm Vice President of Product Innovation at Scovan. So I'll give you a bit of a overview of Scovan, what we do. We are a bit unique in our setup, and then touch on some of the work we've done with Geoff and his team. So Scovan's roots, I guess, go back to 2010 when Scovan Engineering was founded by Donovan Nielsen and Scott Pattinson. Donovan is here today, so he might be primed for some questions later. But typical EPC firm back then, so focused on heavy oil, SAGD markets, doing SAGD service facility engineering in the SAGD space predominantly. Always been a pretty forward-looking company in terms of innovation, always looking at what's out there on the horizon, what's next. The founding members and a few other folks started a sister company called Hive Innovations a number of years later. Hive was largely focused on templated well pad solutions, which through an inventory program and a build program was accelerating delivery time windows of SAGD well pads to market. So that was kind of their first endeavor in the innovation space. That company had the opportunity to acquire Gemini Fabrication, which is a 56-acre fabrication shop up in Ponoka, Alberta. So those 3 companies essentially amalgamated about a year ago and exist now as Scovan Inc. So that puts Scovan in a fairly unique position in terms of what we are able to offer to the marketplace. So we still have the traditional engineering. We can do custom engineering. We have the fab shop now, so we can do custom fabrication, but we can also piece that all together. So we could do lump sum turnkey projects where we're literally doing the whole scope for people start to finish. With the more formal switch from Hive Innovations to Scovan Innovations, essentially became the business unit that I run now, which is essentially innovation and product development. So we are also looking at bringing products to market. So again, a bit of a unique spin to your typical EPC firm. I don't know of any other in the city that does product development, is looking to bring a suite of products to support that new energy transition to market. So my team is working on a handful of them. We do have a PadX product that is commercial. That's again a templated well pad solution, but what we've done is we've switched it to like the manufacturing out of our shop in Ponoka. So the vision there is we do standard packages that people can buy off the lot. So more like building trucks or cars, right? Like it's a manufacturing line. You don't go to, Ford and say, I want a custom design build truck, because that would cost $1 gajillion. So we're doing that in the well pad space. Is here's your base package. Yes, if you want it customized, we can do that, but it's coming off the line, large volume. So we're able to offer, discounted pricing and also speed of timelines, delayed capital for our clients. So we've had some pretty good early success there. And I think that has to do with the existing relationships we had with existing members in industry that allowed us, I think, to do a product launch more seamlessly than maybe some other people. So I can provide some additional insights on that as we go, if that's helpful. Another project that our product that we're working on is we had acquired the IP for a novel steam generation technology, fall of 2020. So we have Alberta Innovates funding and CRIN funding. I agree with you, Bill. CRIN is a great entity to partner with. Wouldn't be where we are on those projects definitely without that funding. But that is actively being piloted in the field at Strathcona's Limburg SAGD facility. We're looking to wrap up that pilot project here at the end of the summer, and then we'll have data packages available to try land that first commercial deployment. So some product development going on, some other stuff in our funnel. We're doing that fuzzy front end of ideation all the time. And then, as I was saying, Scovan, even apart from our products, has always been very forward-looking in who else is doing what out in industry that we could help support and we could help bring to market. So therein lies, the comment that, Geoff, who's right there, hooked us up with Acceleware and said, these guys, this is something we do. Like, it's something we like to offer to those small startups that are trying to find their way, maybe don't have that foothold in industry, or maybe don't have a ton of cash to spend on engineering. What can we do to help them, take that step forward in terms of helping get their products to market as well? So we formed a bit of a partnership. We did all the surface facility engineering for their Marwayne pilot project there. So we did all the engineering, all the design, the fabrication, and then we also supervised all the field construction, coordinated all that for them, got that off the ground. We also co-authored a white paper with them on what a RF-based heavy oil pad would look like that's solar powered, and how that could definitely, fundamentally reduce Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And then continued those discussions, over the last handful of years. Kind of upped them again just recently because, we see where they are. We see this so close yet so far away. We do see the definite potential for this to disrupt industry and do want to be a player in that, because we do see that potential there. So having some more strategic discussions with these guys on, keeping that partnership strong and how can we help each other continue to advance things forward in the space.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And as we hand it over to Ian, we talked about how provocative we wanted to be in this conversation, and we're trying to strike that balance of being able to support industry, but also call out industry where appropriate in terms of what the current, as I said, the walk talk. I was proposing the name of the workshop would be close only counts in hand shoes or horseshoes and hand grenades, and they didn't go for that. But making the point about, we see a lot of tech that is so close, and it could be so disruptive and game changing in terms of the way the public sees us. Because the one thing we don't do in this industry very well is step outside ourselves and look back and see what the public sees. And I mean policymakers and politicians and men on the street as well. So with that, Ian, take us back to the Northwest, the early days, and then fast forward to hydrogen naturally, because it all interconnects.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I do. I run a weird private equity outfit called Northwest Capital. Nobody's ever heard of us because we don't need publicity. What we do is we work right out on the edge of the flat Earth. So if the Earth is flat, we work right on the edge. And we're specialists in not falling off. And when you're out there on the edge, stuff is really, really cheap. That lady's taking a picture. I got to have a coffee cup in my hand. So we work out on the edge. We buy stuff really cheap. These behave like long-dated options, the stuff we do. And we build a business around getting to the option value. So we've done that for a long time. Some of the stuff we did was back in the day, we did the Younger straddle plant. So that was the fourth largest gas plant in Canada when we bought it. 375 million, about 7,000 barrels a day of liquids. We doubled its size and connected it into the Edmonton ethane system. So it turned out to be 750 million and about 60,000 barrels a day of liquids. I used to own the world's largest deep water drilling rig, so harsh environment. I bought it out of a bankruptcy in Pascagoula. It was called the Eric Rowley. We drilled off for him. So we bought it when the day rate was bad, 123,000 a day. When we bought it, that was the cost of just keeping it. And when we sold it, it was 450 a day. But along the way, we had to buy it out of a bankruptcy, move it to Halifax from Pascagoula, complete construction, and then form a new drilling contractor and drill off the East Coast. And we sold it back to the guys who we bought it off because they were fluffed up enough to buy it. And when we sold it, the day rate was $4.50. So that was a good round trip trade. After that, we were involved at Weyburn. So I used to own 11% of the Weyburn unit before CO2 went in the ground. And that was a good experience. And after that, we used to own 30% of Calfrac back in the founding days. That was Matheson's deal, but we were there beside him. And what else did we do? That's a bunch of historical stuff. So I sold everything and thought I was going to retire for a while. And my wife doesn't like it when I'm retired, so she made me go back to work. so I had the idea. By this point, I was sort of thinking about what do you want to do in the world? So I was getting sick about hearing about diversification. I thought, I've been hearing this since Lougheed time. Nobody does anything. So I decided I'm going to do something. So I drew the flow sheet for the Sturgeon refinery on a napkin. And because I knew something about EOR and because refineries make an enormous quantity of CO2, and because I had kids that were in junior high school then, they were saying, this environmental thing is an important issue. Somebody's got to do something about it. And I decided you got to do something about CO2, not because I believed it at that time, but what I believed was those people are going to be the people that are voting 20 years from now. And if you don't do something, you're going to be out of it. So we decided we would build a refinery. We would capture the hydrogen from the refining process. We would build something called Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, and we'd buy reservoirs at the other end, which are some of the best EOR reservoirs in the world, are in central Alberta. So we thought we'll just start the EOR business in Alberta. We'll make the CO2 in a way where it's pure. So most of the CO2 in the world is of low concentration, and the cost to use it is related to the concentration. So if it's combustion CO2, think about a couple $100 a ton. If it's processed CO2 that comes out of a reformer, think of $50 a ton. And you can make it in a way that gives you pure CO2 in the first step. So that's what we did in the refinery. And we built the largest blue hydrogen plant in the world inside the refinery. All of these are on a common theme. So the theme of the refinery, CO2, and all those things is Canada's got a lot of stuff. They got 10% of the world's stuff and only 1.5% of the world's people. So people want our stuff. We can sell it. It could be oil, it could be lumber, it could be all the commodities. Canada's got more than their fair share. So one theme is if you can make that more efficiently, that'll be a business somehow. The other theme that we had was we can do stuff here to essentially increase the value of the things we make. And that's what refining was. Diesel's worth 2.5 times what bitumen is. People were telling me all the oil's going to, Keystone at that time was going to take all the oil from Alberta. I don't believe it. And people were telling you couldn't build refineries in Alberta. I don't believe that either. I think you can do anything here. So essentially you lift the value of the commodity. And then the third thing was, I think there's a big environmental angle now. And we are lucky we saw that maybe before it was as topical as it is today. And so we wanted to focus on businesses that would have value in an increasingly strict environmental regulatory environment. So that's what Enhance and Alberta Carbon Trunk Line and all those things are. So anyway, for me, I build stuff. Once it works, I'm not so interested anymore. So I sell it, start over again. I don't like that thing when you're operating, trying to figure out how this is going to operate. So I just don't do that kind of work. My mom told me when I was a kid, don't fall in love with things that don't love you back. So I see all these things as, fun building them. After that, let somebody else who's way better at being operating it. So we're in we call it hydrogen naturally business. It's kind of a misnomer because we make hydrogen. So when we built the refinery, there was a gasifier in it. We bought it from one of the big licensors, and we spent at this point. So when I started with the refinery, I thought it was going to cost $6 billion. It ended up costing $12 billion. And I wasn't the most popular guy while all of that was going on. And then we started up and it didn't work. It's got a gasifier in it to make the hydrogen and make the pure CO2. The gasifier didn't work. And so it's kind of embarrassing. And for a while I thought maybe I have to change my name and move to California, but I decided I better try and fix the thing. So we essentially fired the licensor and took over and fixed the gasifier ourselves. And so along the way, we became what we think are world scale large gasifier experts. So we started thinking about what we're going to do next. We sold the refinery a couple of years ago, and we decided we're going to start over. We're going to start a business called Hydrogen Naturally. And what Hydrogen Naturally does is it takes scrap wood. So when you cut a forest in Canada down, about 60% of the wood in that forest ends up being scrap. It's either slash that you leave behind because it's such low value that you can't afford to take it out of the forest, or your sawdust in a sawmill, or some, along that continuum. And so what we thought was that's feedstock. It's never going away. There's an enormous quantity in Canada, and we can convert that feedstock using a gasifier to pure CO2 and hydrogen. And so we think the tree is the perfect air capture machine. Everybody's talking about direct air capture. We can't get the physics on that to come in at less than $1,000 a ton. So what we thought was there's a chance with wood you can get to $100 a ton. It's still expensive, but we think the economy can afford $100 a ton. So we started trying to figure out if we could do that or not. And we still think we can after a couple of years, 3 years now, I guess. So the plan is essentially the tree takes the CO2 out of the air, turns it into carbon. We take the carbon in the tree, put it in a gasifier, and the energy in the tree helps to make hydrogen. So we get a little bit of hydrogen. The size of plant we got is going to sequester about 300,000 tons a year of CO2, and it'll make about 10,000 tons a year, 8,000 tons a year, sorry, of hydrogen. And so the hydrogen is only a really small part of the revenue. The main revenue comes from the carbon negative elements of the process that we're running. We think we'll get paid for that, and we think the economy can afford $100 a ton. We don't think it, like today, if you add CO2, if you add clean fuels credits and TIER, you're over $300 a ton. We don't think if that got impressed across the economy that the economy would function. So we're thinking it'll work in $100 world. So that's what we're trying to do. And that must be 7 minutes by now. Thank you.
No, that's perfect. And I should have put Northwest Capital into the foreground relative, because a lot of it comes out of that thinking. And I actually first heard of Ian when he poached my CFO from another business I was running in order between him and Ron Matheson, Dave Ryan. They poached him years ago. And then I said, I'm going to find out who this guy is. And then here you go. We're sitting here together on this platform. So I'm going to turn now to the audience, and I'm looking at Geoff. And what we'll do, maybe I'll get you to pass Geoff your mic. But I'm going to ask you to start off the conversation, Geoff, as an advisor to companies like, because we've got a phenomenal range of boards and different technical advisors who help companies like this out. So what were you seeing? And this is going to be the theme as we engage with the audience, is getting your perspectives on what Acceleware and Scovan and even Hydrogen Naturally can do to sort of crack the code of the headlines that we're hearing and the opportunities in them. So, you've been involved with Acceleware right from the get-go, and you and I have chatted about this many times over the years, but what were you seeing and what were your opportunities and frustrations as an advisor?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Bill. You sort of alluded to it off the top, that part of the challenge is doing this fast enough so that when you finally get there, it's still meaningful for some life cycle of positive value over time, right? So that's still the ultimate challenge, is how do we do this fast enough? How do we accelerate these solutions in such a way that we get there, right? So spending time with these guys and spending time with those guys, it was a dating service kind of a connection, right? Just getting everybody in the right place. Lots of really smart minds who are committed to thinking about how you get the solution done. And now here we are, maybe not as soon as we would have liked to have been, but I guess that was ultimately what it was trying to do, was trying to build a synergistic cohort of people who are singularly focused on going forward. And that's the nice thing about Acceleware, is their company size allows them to be singular focused on a task. And Scovan has the bench strength with all the people behind Jane's team, particularly, to be thinking about in a cross-functional kind of way around how we get these solutions to market. So my question would still be, I guess it's twofold. One would be, if we look into the rearview mirror, so both Scovan and Ian could phase into this too, and Acceleware, have we learned anything in how this all gets structured to look forward around how do we accelerate these solutions faster? Because throughout this whole history, there was a whole bunch of like-minded people who really wanted to go ahead and do this. But to Geoff's point, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. So what do we need to do differently, looking at what we've learned before, to move these things faster? So is it more integration of startups, more singular focus on a more effective business model, or a multi-sided business model? So I'd be interested to hear from everybody. How do we do this faster?
I'm going to pick on Nicole when she's not eating here in a few minutes, because I do want to raise the theme around how the world sees us. And we have phenomenal the Federal Trade Commission service is phenomenal. It's our eyes and ears on the world of opportunity. And we'll come back to that because I think your point about acceleration and opportunities beyond our own borders is an important theme in terms of it. But, you know, take a crack at answering Jeff's question, and maybe you could also raise the opportunity for cross-sectoral application of CTI industrial application. You can talk about the potash dynamic. And does it, you know,
Yeah, sure. It's a really good point because when I think back to when we first started this particular project, the Marwayne in particular, somebody in industry at one of my partners said to me, you know, this is going to take a lot longer and cost a lot more than you think. And, you know, what I thought, well, okay, well, I'll just prove you wrong. But obviously I was proven wrong. So, but the question remains, like, if I think about this logically and with not very much knowledge of how technology gets developed and adopted in industry, particularly oil and gas industry, which is the one I know the best, it does take so long, and it costs a lot more money than you think it would if you do the analysis saying, okay, well, this is how long this task should take, and this is how long this task should take. So the whole project should be this long, right? But you don't realize that there's a lot of inefficiency in that process somewhere, and I really can't nail it down where the main inefficiency is. But when I think about how RF heating got developed in Acceleware, I'll talk a little bit about Suncor, but I mean, all of our partners, similar process. But originally we got interest in Suncor through a guy that maybe people here know, Cal Coulter, who was an inventor who was, like, I don't know about trapped in Suncor, but he was like an inventor in Suncor, and he just ran projects and he was great at it. But Cal decided he wanted to ride his motorcycle around the world. So what do I do now? Like, my guy in Suncor is gone. Has he done a good enough job within Suncor championing our technology? And if the answer is, well, a little bit, then there's an inefficiency where I have to develop a new champion, get that institutional knowledge going. So that's part of it. I think the other part of it is these projects are multidisciplinary. So we know part of the technology, we don't know all of it. So we need partners. We got to develop partners along the way. They've got to buy into the idea, see what's in it for them. And all of these things just tend to take longer than you think. Always got to factor in the fact that nothing works perfectly, right? Like, when you develop it, you have this great idea that you're going to build something and it's going to work perfectly, right? So it's R&D, so it never works perfectly. If it was easy, they would have done it years ago. Tend to not factor that into it too much. You always think you're going to be perfect when you first start. So those are two areas where I think that time gets added and dollars get added to the project, and those are the two things that I think I'd like to figure out a way to get shorter.
So that's well put. And I'm gonna, how many people in the room have heard of Dr. Carl Clark? Right? Not enough people in the room have heard of Dr. Carl Clark. But of course, where I'm going to go at, you know, from a Scovan perspective, is when you have a history of innovation on a particular focus, in this case, you know, the idea that we will get at that bitumen with a combination of hot water and temperature over time. So Dr. Carl Clark was one of the original scientists who started to crack the code back in the 1920s of figuring out, how do we unlock the value from this gooey, thick, viscous stuff? And Roger Butler, who many start to know that's a little more contemporary history. But the point I'm making here is the industry invests in such a focused area on thermal recovery in this case, and then all of a sudden a disruptor comes along and said, "Oh, we can do this a lot differently." But how does Scovan think about you're up against billions of dollars of investment into a particular way of thinking about steam and solvent and all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden somebody comes along and said, "Well, we can do something different." That disruption is up against a wall of innovation that has existed in investment already, and a lot of professionals who've made their careers on a particular style of thermal recovery. So, you're part of that disruption process now, coming up with a new way of thinking about thermal recovery. But how do you run sort of around, or do an end run around that wall of innovation investment that's been decades in the making? I'll get Jane to answer it, and then I'll get you to answer it, Ian. And then I am going to go to Nicole, because there's this really interesting global opportunity when we start thinking about scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3 and even scope 4, where we can tell a better domestic story internationally. But first, how do you get against that SAG-D?
I think if I had the answer, I would
I
tell you all.
know.
Um,
It's almost a
but
rhetorical question. but-
yeah, like,
yeah.
I mean, you're exactly right, Bill. Like it's a huge challenge, because people are very, like, the industry knows what they know. They have all that experience that they have. That's what they're familiar with. They're more inclined, people are more inclined to make those just sustaining innovation changes, those small changes that, just do moderate improvements to what they're doing. They're honed in on their craft, and to do a true disruption, as something like the RF would be, has its own very, very different set of challenges. You have to, I think, find those risk takers out there. I think you have to find those internal champions on a producer somewhere. How exactly you find them, I don't know, but you ultimately need to sell them on the vision, I think, sell them on the opportunity that's there, really view it through their lens, and help walk them through, this opportunity that's here. And can they help you? Can they partake in helping it get across that finish line?
Ian, what are your thoughts on that? You and I are the two boomers on the panel here in terms of thinking about what industry has invested in over the years, and it creates a bit of almost institutional blockage because things are working reasonably well. And look, we've come a long way in SAG-D technology to begin with. But how do you think about, to Jane's point, getting that internal championing around disruption?
I think you're talking about the wrong thing. When you talk about this thing, it's a lottery ticket. That's why someone funds it. It's a lottery ticket on something. And so I got to control the odds of the lottery ticket. So if I know it's long duration, and I'm saying I'm dealing with Suncor, how long is the guy I'm dealing with going to be there? If I'm not up at the top of the goddamn thing, I'm wasting my time. And even then I might be wasting my time, but I got a chance. So the way I control the odds on something like this is I go buy a reservoir somewhere. I farm in on a reservoir, get control of it. And then when I go to New York, I'm talking about billions. I'm not talking about, we might license this to somebody in the future.
Right.
I'm talking about, we're getting oil out of our reservoir, and there's 50 million barrels of oil coming out because of this that isn't economic. I can sell that idea, but when you try and go to all these people and you're trying to keep them all together in a long duration project, it's like you're going into the forest, and somebody at the other end of the forest is planting trees at the same time you're trying to get through it. So you have to control as many of those things as you can, and you can't control them in some big, homogeneous or non-homogeneous group that's changing all the time. They'll run out of money, they'll change their mind, and in these long duration things, you don't know where you don't know what the problems are when you start. You just know. What we do when we look at these things is, if it's a science experiment, I'm really focused on who are the people conducting the experiment. Are there really operational people in that thing that understand how to produce oil out of this? And I want that populated, and I don't want to be relying on my partners for those things. I don't want partners. I want to decide what to do and then start doing it and get the money to do it. And where do the oil sands come from? some guy here said there was a lot of oil. Suncor was not a heavy oil producer. When Sunoco came here, they weren't they weren't an oil producer. They were a gas producer. So some young guy in Calgary somehow got in to see Pew, that was the family that controlled Sunoco. And Pew decided, you know, that sounds like there's a lot of oil down there. I'll back that guy. Well, Pew was there for 25 years, and that was why they got there. They didn't get there because they dealt with somebody in middle management. If you're in middle management and you're making these decisions, those are life-threatening. You might lose your job if you bet on the wrong one of these. So you're very, very careful about what you bet, and all of us would be. So you have to stay away from that situation. You got to control the odds on the lottery ticket. If you can't do that, do something else.
That's a really good point. And anybody who's interested in the historical dimensions, Ian, he's as much of a historian as he is an entrepreneur. And if you want to read and we're going to get Doug, if we can get the mic to Doug from CalScan here. But if you want to read a fascinating history, Howard Pugh, Sun Oil Company, phenomenal, great point about how to see things. So we're going to go, Doug's going to ask a question, then we'll go to Nicole here, because I want to frame this into, middle management also being a layer of caprock through which good ideas don't necessarily get to the C-suite. Doug.
Yeah, some of us who were around when the earth was flat, when GCOS started way back, didn't they try this with the microwave technology? If I remember correctly.
Great Canadian Oil Sands.
Great Canadian
Sorry
Oil Sands. Yeah.
if we're.
For those of you who don't, that's who started the.
I don't know if there was anything that early in Canada, but certainly Chevron was working on it in the 80s, 70s. Shell was working on it. Shell
why
was
didn't it grab
working.
legs then?
Yeah. Maybe a downhole heater type technology.
Something going on then.
Yeah.
So just a quick question with Scovan, how does your technology line up from an investment point of view, from a dollar point of view with Huff and Puff or SAGD? Where are you guys on the bar from a cost perspective?
Yeah. So we talk about 10,000 barrel a day economics as just our benchmark, and we're thinking that we are about 50% of the capital cost all in on a 30-year life. And the reason we can be cheaper is significantly less CPF investment. You can pretty much scale everything to be on a pad for what we're trying to do. So that would be grid connected. Yeah. So, and then with grid connected, we think we can be 40% less operating cost as well. So.
Okay, go. Maybe you can pass that mic to Ian, because we're going to share the mic with the audience. Yeah.
Sorry, but so in Alberta, we got, 200 billion barrels or roughly of SAGD type stuff in mining. And then there's 1.5 trillion barrels in the middle that nobody knows how to get out.
Right.
It seemed to me when I heard about you, I was like, well, that's the stuff I'd be working on. There's no caprock requirement. No one knows how to get it out. It's too deep to mine. And so does it work in that part of the reservoir?
Yeah, definitely. The people that have mine adjacent reservoir, so like where the reservoir starts to tilt a little bit too deep.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And Gene is here, and there's part of that question that we'll come to in terms of some of the magnitude of the opportunity in that last kind of reservoir you're talking about. But I want to ask, Nicole, do you have the mic yet? Oh, sorry, there it is. But so you get to see how the world sees Canada, right? And we have this internal narrative, I love Canadian oil sands and all the bumper stickers and all that. And the world needs more Canada. The first load out of Burnaby's going this week, right? In terms of coming out of the new Trans Mountain expansion, and we'll be shipping molecules out of LNG Canada by spring of next year. Tell us what guidance would you give us in terms of storytelling as an industry on the heavy oil side of what you're hearing and your team is hearing in other jurisdictions that are looking, saying, gee, those Canadians are cracking some interesting code.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you touch on the storytelling angle, because that's something I've really kind of been harping on. I don't think that we do it well enough here. But despite that, there is a recognition internationally that Canada, and especially Alberta, are leading in terms of decarbonization and innovation. And part of that is the regulatory framework, that we are early in terms of developing that and providing the incentives and, the carrots and the sticks, I guess, for that decarbonization and the innovation piece. So there is quite a bit of international interest in seeing how we've managed things here, how we support innovation, how we can spur that. And there are, just to give you an example, there are countries that are world leading in terms of decarbonization. Norway, for example, just had a delegation here to learn about how we're doing CCUS. And the innovation piece was something that really impressed them, because just culturally, there are some differences in terms of how we do things that impress even a very forward, or early mover like Norway. But, I think, one thing that we always touch on when we talk about innovation is the valley of death, right? Getting that first commercial customer and getting that first deployment out there. And I don't want to paint too rosy a picture, but I think there's an international opportunity that sometimes we miss. Like, we tend to think that that first customer has to be domestic. And I'm not going to say that it's, easier necessarily to go internationally, but there is an international awareness of capabilities here, of the innovation space, and there's an appetite, a growing appetite for earlier stage technologies. It used to be that you'd have to have domestic traction, right? You'd have to have that track record. You have to have that, that proven domestic record. But everybody, every country and these large corporations, everyone set these net zero targets and now are realizing that they don't really have a way of getting there, right? They don't have the technologies domestically, right? So we're seeing a lot of interest in adopting these technologies, earlier stage technologies, and appetite to invest in some of them, or for the first deployment to be in some of these other countries. So I think my advice would be to not be closed to that opportunity, right? To be open to it, recognizing that it's resource intensive to look internationally, right? We're talking about business environments that are perhaps a bit less transactional, and those here are much more relationship based. Like, it's a big time investment to get into these markets. That's where my organization comes in and can help with that a little bit. But my message is basically just, don't close your eyes to that. There is an international appetite, even if you're perhaps earlier stage and still commercializing. It's
Yeah, maybe you could just give us a quick 30-second overview of Global Affairs Canada, where the Trade Commissioner Service, and because there is a whole toolkit available to companies like Acceleware and others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. And I don't want to assume that everyone knows what their Trade Commissioner Service does. So yeah, we are part of Global Affairs Canada. So through consulates, embassies, high commissions around the world, we have trade teams in over 160 cities. And we are basically built to support the export activities of Canadian companies. So that can be everything from helping you strategize, helping identify grant funding for international business development, but most importantly, those relationships overseas that our team have in terms of identifying potential local partners or clients in those markets.
Perfect. I remember years ago, to this point of international opportunities, of course, one of the great untold stories of our own oil sands industry is the role of Venezuelan science in terms of from PDVSA. And there was a point in Fort McMurray, there was more Venezuelan PhDs working on various research innovations out there. But I read a piece years ago, U.S. Geological Survey, about 23 countries in the world have commercially viable bitumen deposits. Alberta's not the only place in the world where Mother Earth has pushed hydrocarbons to the surface, but the point was they needed the right technologies, the right safety cultures, all those other, Canadian recipe book stuff. And I was stunned at the volume of how much there is. Onshore Ghana, for example, has tons of commercial, they just can't crack the code on it. So have you ever thought about international?
You're asking me, Bill?
Yeah, pointed question. I'm making eye contact, Geoff. Yeah.
Actually, the international market for us is actually really interesting in a number of areas. Obviously, we started this through somebody operating in California. California is an interesting case, not really allowed to do any more thermal development using either steam or natural gas fired. Central America, lots of interest there outside of Venezuela. For example, Colombia is quite interested because of kind of a lack of natural gas in terms of being able to do something like SAGD. So the idea of using renewables and something like RFXL is quite interesting. And the Middle East is quite an interesting market for us. Super heavy oil focused in places like Oman and Kuwait, and really a desire to decarbonize among those Middle East countries. So yeah, the Trade Commissioner has been quite helpful for us in sort of developing contacts there, and we look to engage with them as we develop those markets.
So just you know, back to a point that Nicole made, shameless promotion here for Carbon Management Canada, another great organization in terms of, we've just signed as a company on as a joint industry partner with the Newell County Energy Park, that they've got a 550-meter CCS injection well down there, and they want to drill the 2,500-meter well. And it's also part of that ecosystem that we forget to tell the story about the Emissions Reduction Alberta's, the SIF programs, all the funding opportunities that we have in terms of how the ecosystem works in Canada. But I want to, just as we move to the final stretch of the conversation, I want to frame this in terms of, and Ian and Jane and Geoff, on the emissions reduction potential of, you know, the decarbonization lens. But have you modeled, you know, at the Marwayne project, through an emissions eliminated life cycle analysis, or somebody can say, well, gee, well, there's the answer to my scope 3 conundrums there.
Yeah, definitely. As you're trying to access funding through a lot of the programs, either federally or provincially, one of the things that you're going to be asked to put a benchmark in is your emissions reduction potential. And so we've done a lot of analysis of that, and it basically, the thing about RFXL is it's as clean as the power that you hook it up to, right? So one thing that we don't get enough credit for in Alberta is we are greening our grid at a rate that's quite astounding when you think about it. We just a few years ago decided that we wanted to convert to gas all the coal-fired plants. So the greenhouse gas intensity of our grid has gone down substantially in the last 5 years, and I think it's going to go down. I assume if we start building renewables again, in the next 5 years, it'll get to the point where we think, compared to SAGD, so that's our benchmark, that we'd be 50% less greenhouse gas intensity compared to SAGD in 5 years. Currently, we think it's about 30% less. And then if you use renewables or nuclear, non-emitting type electricity, it'd be 100%. So we definitely model that quite a bit as part of the funding applications.
Perfect. So just before we're going to get Jane to think about how Scovan thinks about emissions on the client side and that sort of, then we'll go to Ian on that. But just want to pause here. Is there any moments of advice or guidance from the audience in terms of your own corporate experience, your own entrepreneurial experience that you want to weigh in? If you can say, here, Geoff, is the key to unlocking $5 million. Do I need to repeat? Always be closing, right? $5 million. But I will say, just before Jane answers, Emissions Reduction Alberta turns 15 on June 18th, and they're going to be releasing a very cool database, which looks at every technology that Emissions Reduction Alberta through the TIER program has invested in. And it's really kind of cool. I got to play around with it. And, you know, you can go in and you say, show me, you know, I want to see a cross comparison between the agri-food industry and geothermal. And you can play with the numbers. But of course, to Geoff's point, every piece of that funding dollar had to be third-party independently verified in terms of, so it's a database of the good, the bad, the ugly. But again, it's one of those sort of, why aren't we telling that story more effectively in terms of the polluter pays for progress principle, right? In terms of it. But so when you're working with clients, how much of in the front end engineering of something that does emissions dynamics show up?
I think a lot of times it honestly depends who we're dealing with.
Okay.
Some clients, it's front of mind, but some it still really isn't. And I think some of this has to do with, you know, that still a bit of the unknown as to how much does it actually cost, right? So we definitely have done some work with folks on, carbon capture products, scoping that out. There's grants available for that. So we've helped some of our clientele even put in applications for funding for programs like that. And yeah, I echo, I guess, Geoff's comments that, you know, even for us with our HIPAP technology, all those grants, Obviously, we have to show those emissions reductions. That's a key to getting, I think, a lot of the technology development funding. But yeah, with our clients, I'd say a bit hit and miss. Like, I think they all know it's obviously coming and on their radar, but until there's a little more certainty around the cost, it's tricky for them to make those investment decisions.
When you say that, what do they think that is not coming or coming at them relative to reporting requirements? What's the literacy level in your client world around, well, there's this whole thing that the IFSB and the CSSB and we're going to have, CSA is going to mandate, and they're following the stuff that the SEC is doing, in the States. Is there a literacy level that can be improved with clients on that stuff?
Yes, I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them are, yes, followers, but not necessarily first movers. We don't necessarily work with the tier 1 players. We kind of work with the mid-sized people more than that. So there's a lot of watching and awareness and waiting, but not, I'd say, a lot of forward-moving action until they know for certain.
So Ian, when you think at Northwest Capital around, you've been at it a long time and the emissions momentum is accelerating, we still don't really quite know how everything is going to play out. But how much does that play into, say, at Hydrogen Naturally, the way you think about the opportunity that gives by getting in front of it?
So there's two kind of clients, if you're in this world. One kind is their cost of capital people. So they're Chevron, CNRL, people like that. They have a department in there and they talk to the financial markets and they talk about, what we're doing, what's our ESG program. Those people will be knowledgeable about it and they'll talk on a corporate level. And the reason they're doing that is they want to reduce their cost of capital by doing something. That's one type of client. Then there's another type of client. How much do I get paid for a ton of CO2 when I save it? And I want to convert that to money because I need money to keep this thing going. And so they're completely different worlds. And if you're talking to the intermediate guys, you're not talking to cost of capital people. You're talking to people who get paid for a ton of CO2.
Right.
And they're going to want to know, when's it going to come? How certain is it, am I going to get it? And how much is there? And you better be able to talk that way. And you have to know, how do you get to the credit market? How do you convert that into money? And so when I hear the RF stuff, like, I don't know how I convert that to money. I mean, that's great for the ESG guys and the cost of capital people, but I don't know how you convert that to money, because somebody has to give you a piece of paper saying, here, you get 50 tons of this stuff because you used RF heating rather than the other one. But you have to understand that when you're financing this. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's a critical point. I mean, just in terms of, because we tend to universalize the client out there and say they're all motivated by this. But to your point, they're on other opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of what are the drivers.
Yeah, it goes all the way from I don't care to I have to look like I care to I care. I have to know who I'm dealing with, when I'm trying to convince them of something.
Perfect. So any audience, is there, Lindy, any online from our, passive online audience? Okay, so just as we will spend about 10 more minutes, and I want to come back to this point that you've alluded to and Ian has underlined and made explicit around the long game and internal champions, because we're in this. I just finished a year's worth of work on the Federal Steering Committee on Building Canada's Next Generation Energy Workforce. And one of the things that we really looked at was the demographics. And 12 years ago, this industry was really worried about the silver tsunami, we used to call it, or the great crew change, right? The baby boomers flushing out of the system and where all that knowledge capital was going to be. And what we figured out is, there's still a few boomers left, but too many of them have exited the industry. To your point about your internal Suncor champion, they're on Salt Spring Island with a big bag of weed and some Coronas. And no, I'm saying it, but what it's left is it's hard to identify who those internal innovators are, because they came from a different generation, right, in terms of it. So I'll get each of you to sort of, that'll be the closing question unless the audience has it, is how do you navigate what I call human caprock in organizations, that is to find those, there's a great guy, maybe many of you know Scott Volk at Tourmaline, right? And he's doing phenomenal stuff in the gas space, but he's one of those guys if you get a few minutes with Scott, you get a key to unlock a lot of kingdoms, right? And in terms of, and there's lots of them around, but how do you find them? Besides joining CRIN. Did I shamelessly promote that, CRIN? Yeah, thank you. So I'll start with you and go to Jane on that, and we'll conclude with Ian, because that's part of cracking the code, I think, right?
Yeah, obviously, I think that, you know, the way we try to do it is we try to network as much as possible. We try to have as many meetings as we can with industry insiders, people within companies, and just getting the word out. The problem with that is, as a small organization, your ability to hit the right people is limited. Hire great people. Like, one of our most connected people in this industry is Allison Ahern, and she's our director of subsurface engineering, and she knows everyone. But I mean, she can only touch so many people in the industry with the story, and exactly. Yeah. So how do you leverage that, is, I guess, the question for me is how do you, you know, tell the story enough that you're going to hit somebody who's going to say to his boss or his colleague or her colleague, or this is a great idea, and we should think about looking into it a little bit more. And that's, I think that's how you do it, but we need to figure out ways to make those collisions happen more often and quicker, I think.
CRIN makes collisions happen. That's, you know, I keep validating that, because it is truly the network of networks. And there's other great work, PTAC, you know, you can just go down through the list of great ones doing things. But, you know, maybe I'll change it up a little bit, Jane and Ian, and to get you to sort of reflect on the importance of the right, and I'm looking at Geoff reading here, because one thing that's always impressed me about Acceleware was its advisory board and process, right? So maybe reflect on the importance of getting the right people at the table from a guidance perspective, who are helping you sort of think about where the business could go, where it should go, and their connections in that space. Any advice you can give to the crowd or to?
Sure. I actually think I'd like to share, like, along the similar lines, but like I think I alluded to earlier, we seem to have had decent luck with PADX. And I guess just some of the insights around that, I think a couple things, it was less risky because it's no new technology. It's more just a business model switch up. But I think we leveraged in that case some of our obviously existing relationships with clients. Like, we were already a trusted service provider. So I think that definitely helped us. But it was a few key reach outs to a few key people in some organizations that were at that higher level. Like, they were higher than middle management. Like, we assembled essentially a group of VPs from a couple different industry members. So, and those were all relationship based, right? Like, even we ended up getting Meg to the table based on our prior work we'd done at Pengrowth when Derek Evans was still at Pengrowth, right? So it's like, you know that right personal connection. It was like, hey, Derek, like Donovan sent Derek an email, said, I'm thinking of doing this. What are your thoughts? And he's like, yeah, I'm sending this guy, go, kind of thing. And then we leveraged our internal relationships with existing clients from Strathcona and Conacher, and then another prior relationship person, not necessarily company, over at Harvest. So it was just getting those key players in the room in that instance really allowed us, I think, to get that early traction and move forward. And we were pretty strategic on then assembling that team and making sure everyone there agreed what success looked like and how we could move forward then together as a collaborative team. So easier, I think, yeah, it was a little easier in that instance maybe than in some of these coming in as an outsider or whatever. But I do think establishing those key players and building those correct relationships early on is an important part to the success that we were able to have.
Okay. And I'm gonna, because you know, I don't want to be Ian in the position to say all the smart kids in the room took my answers earlier, but I'm going to get him to reflect in, as our closing comment, on the importance of show and tell, right? You know, because you've been always a proponent of that action, to help people feel it, touch it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, don't do it. But do you think we could do a better job in industry? And I think I say that because we got a bunch of our folks today who are up at on a tour in the oil sands with Meg, right? And I remember we took a bunch of customers up to the Suncor mine, and the most fascinating thing they found out was when the guide said, we wear away the equivalent of 2 pickup trucks a week in terms of abrasion. And if you can help us with that, we want, that was that very powerful moment. Show and tell, is that an opportunity that we're passing by sometimes, I think?
I think it seems to me like the discussion here is mixing the tactical with the strategic. And so if I'm trying to look for somebody that can help me, sorry, if I'm a low talker. So if I'm trying to look for somebody that can help me, I spend a lot of time thinking about what that person looks like. And I'm not talking to the world. I'm trying to identify somebody that can help me. So what does somebody to help me look like? They've got enough authority. They've got enough passion for the idea that I'm after. They understand the idea. They can be somebody who's an internal proponent of the idea. When I talk at something like this, quite invariably, somebody will come up to me at the end and say, hey, we're working on this thing. I think, well, that sounds pretty cool. Let's find out more about it. So that's why I do it, because I'm looking for future food supplies. But if I was doing something else, if I was doing a refinery, I'd still talk in big rooms, but I'd have an idea, who do I want to talk to? And those are strategic. They're not tactical decisions. I can fill my life up easily with all kinds of tactical, phone calls every minute.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Nothing comes out of them. So you have to have a strategic plan when you do these things and an approach to it, and you have to behave that way. And if you're not behaving that way, you're just wasting your time, and that's the rationed resource.
That's an excellent point, the delineation between the tactical and the strategic. But if you can get the right strategic people on your tactical show and tell, then you've got.
And quite often, the really strategic people are really annoying. And so so it's some operating guy, and he's got very strong opinions about it. And if you get him convinced, those opinions project into wherever he is, because he's a respected person inside there. But he's going to tell you, this isn't going to work. This is really stupid. And he's going to tell you all the things that he thinks. And if you can get him convinced on something like this, he's the internal broadcaster you need when you're trying to convince him.
Perfect. Well, we'll just end on that note. That's a really, I like that. I work with a lot of guys like that. So I just wanted to, any final questions from the audience?
There is one
Oh,
question online as
okay.
well.
We'll take the online question, then we'll go right here. Perfect.
So Robert Smith is asking if there has been an effort taken to influence the First Nations beneficiaries of RF Excel from a land use and water perspective, to add language to land use treaties that would force producers to switch to or use electrification for extraction instead of the traditional SAGD processes.
Wonderfully put, Robert. So I'll give that one. We can pass the mic to Geoff.
Yeah, definitely. We identified early on that our technology could generate benefits that First Nation and Métis people were asking for in terms of compared to other ways to produce resources on their lands and their traditional lands. So we definitely feel like that's an important part. We have a partnership with Aboriginal organization, Saudene, and as I mentioned before, Jim Boucher sits on our board of directors. So it's really something that we take quite seriously.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Jim again, right? Because that's a critical component of the going forward. You see what's happening in the Indigenous partner space with Tamarack and New Vista, like some phenomenal stuff. So Sally, we're just going to bring the mic right here.
Hi, actually it wasn't a question. It's a challenge, I guess. I want to throw the challenge to you guys, Acceleware, as well as maybe the entire community. If we look at I'm a technical guy, so I have to speak things in a technical term. If you look at thermal recovery process, steam related, SAGD, CSS, or even adding solvent ion, they have something in common. What that is, it's basically thermodynamics on top of Navier-Stokes equations. That's all. But if you look at the electrical or electromagnetic heating, it's a different physics. It's thermodynamics plus Maxwell equations. Now, if we want to think of this as equivalent, then we have to believe that Navier-Stokes equation and the Maxwell equation are equivalent. They're not. Therefore, I think that that's Geoff talking about the serendipity and those kind of things, right? And actually, we know the SAGD, CSS came from many serendipity on the way. And here we see the development of the this technology here, Acceleware version 3.0. It go through the many steps of serendipity. Maybe there will be more serendipity there, but I think what's missing, and would be the challenge that's what I throw to everybody, especially the Acceleware guys, which I know more than 10 years already, I think, is that can we find the actual process that's not necessarily equivalent or not necessarily the same as what the thermal, the typical, the steam-related thermal process, but it's more suitable for the advantage that that the antenna has. Those kind of things. That would be maybe in the end it looks completely different. But we are right now. What I feel is we are trying to make it look same. I think we should open the mind and look entirely different from different angle, and maybe find something that maybe even another factor of something more efficient.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying is like when we tend to talk to producers or reservoir engineers or other operators within the industry, as soon as we start talking about Maxwell's equations, it's like, like the shades come down on their eyes and they're just not equipped to understand it. And they tend to ask us questions that are coming from the angle of known thermodynamic or thermal process questions, and it's something that we have to educate people on, and we're trying to do that as best we can. But it definitely is, like you say, it requires people to think about things in new ways and ways which are not comfortable, right? Because there's so much history in SAGD and other thermal processes, and it works really well. When it works really well. So you have to get people to start thinking about the process in a different way when you introduce electromagnetic energy, for sure. And that's one of the challenges, is that there are very smart people who have been working on SAGD for, what did you say, Allison, 1976, something like that. We're just starting, and we've already been at it 14 years. Yeah.
To the point about timescales. So we'll just wrap up here. One other sort of nugget you may take away. There's a really cool new platform out there called Technology Catalog, www.technologycatalog.com. It was started by a bunch of senior Shell executives out of The Hague. Some of you in the room may know Dr. Larry Marks, one of the great names in Canadian geophysics, longtime Shell executive. He's the Canada country partner for them. And how the model works is that an Acceleware, as a technology vendor, could put its technology on this global platform. And so the Saudi Aramcos, the PDVSAs, the Petrobras's, the ENIs, the Totals, the Equinors of the world are subscribers to this. And at Geologic, we're going to put a bunch of our global tools, our emissions tools, and that sort of thing on it. And it's really kind of cool because when and Enbridge has just been signed up as a Canadian partner on it. And so it's about tools, it's about data, it's whatever products you have. but the subscribing companies can also issue challenges. And there's a lot of offshore stuff on it, as you might expect, and that sort of thing. But have a look at that technologycatalog.com. So if you're a Canadian company, it's dirt cheap to put your product or your service onto the platform. The price is paid by the subscribing operating companies around the world. And it's got an impressive alignment of some of the major, the Seven Sisters and the Petronoses and those big global companies are on there as well. So it goes to Nicole's point earlier about, wow, you Canadians have been doing some pretty good stuff, and right across the molecular spectrum. So I'll just leave you with that, technologycatalog.com. They run a cool AI tool. We produce our software GeoScout. They ran their AI tool over our webpage, and they came up with a better promotion for GeoScout than we could have written ourselves. It was very, very cool. So just have a look at that, and they're staking a big claim on Canadian opportunities, because they see that's where the great tech is coming from on that. So we'll end. We still got lots of sandwiches. We have the room till 1 o'clock before CRIN kicks us out, and so let's mix and mingle and talk about Maxwell's equation. So thank you, everybody, and thanks to our online guests. Lindy, you can bid them farewell. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.